So libraries have always been vital places for homeless individuals, and the needs of this community have only increased with the cost of living crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. Today we're joined by Kavan Stafford, who is a trustee of CILIP Scotland, but in his day job is information officer at Glasgow's Mitchell Library. And this will be a discussion of his research into staff perceptions of homeless users and the barriers they face to using library services, as well as the measures he's put in place over the past 12 months to make the Mitchell Library in Glasgow as welcoming as possible as we move into a post-COVID world. Okay, so welcome along, Kavan. I'll let you take it from here, and thanks for doing this.
Well, thanks, Sean. Really nice to see everyone here from so far afield. I think I saw someone from Germany, someone from France, so that's pretty exciting. I'm going to share my screen just now, and once I'm sure everyone can see it, I'm going to turn off my camera because my bandwidth is not at all reliable. So just don't judge that desktop. So I'm going to turn off my camera, hopefully you can see that, and we'll make a start. So welcome everyone to this CILIPS talk on how to help homeless users in public libraries. Thanks for all of you taking the time this morning to come see it. I know that especially with people being on holiday over the Easter period, this can be a busy time, so thank you. I'll talk at you for about 45 minutes or so, and then I'll have some time for questions at the end if you want to ask them. I can't guarantee I'll be able to answer them, but I'll certainly try. So a wee bit about me before I start. There I am. Couldn't get that picture to be slightly less stretched. My name's Kavan Stafford, and I'm an information officer at the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, and I'm also one of your CILIPS trustees as well as of this year. I got into libraries essentially by accident. I'd been working in betting shops while doing my master's in English, and reached the point where once that was completed, I needed like a new job, full-time job. And I was really reluctant to go for libraries because I thought it would be really boring. And my partner actually filled in my application for me for Glasgow libraries and submitted it, and I went along to the interview kind of under duress, and I ended up working in Easterhouse Library, which I ended up loving. And then I moved to work as a library assistant in the Mitchell Library, and then started working as an information officer at the Mitchell. And about the same time as I started doing that in 2019, I began my master's in library and information management in the University of Ulster. So today I'm going to be speaking about an issue which I know affects all of us that work in public libraries, and I know it's of interest to lots of us who work in other forms of libraries, which is homeless users of public libraries. So we're public library professionals. We always try and aim to be as welcoming as we possibly can to all users of libraries. But I think we know, if we're honest with ourselves, and it's only us here, so we can be, that we could often be doing more to be welcoming to all vulnerable users and to homeless users in particular. So as I said, I started my last master's in library and information management in 2019, and then in 2021 through to 22, I wrote my dissertation on staff attitudes towards homeless users in the Mitchell Library and what we could do to improve that and improve the homeless users' experience of the Mitchell Library. Some of the results of this, of the surveys I did, and what we've been doing moving forward as a result, are what I'm going to be discussing today. So before I begin properly, here's the definition of homelessness I'm going to be working with for the duration of today's event. I'm working with this one because it's the Scottish Government's definition and it's their statistics I'm going to be using. So a person is homeless if they have no accommodation in the UK or elsewhere. A person is also homeless if they have accommodation but cannot reasonably occupy it, for example, because of a threat of violence, although there's various reasons why that might be the case. A person is potentially homeless if it's likely that they will become homeless within 2 months. And a person is intentionally homeless, this is the phrase that the government uses, if they deliberately did or failed to do anything which led to the loss of accommodation. What that usually means is something like withholding rent. I'm also going to be using the word homeless throughout as well. You may have seen maybe articles or things online, particularly in America, about discussion of the term unhoused instead of homeless. I think the truth is that we can get bogged down in the arguments about what word to use and end up forgetting what we're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to use homeless because that's what the Scottish Government uses, but if you prefer to think of it as unhoused, that's totally fine. It's up to yourselves. So I've split this presentation up into 6 parts, which I know seems like a lot, but some of them are actually quite short. We're going to start with a wee look at the some statistics on homeless people, in Scotland and in Glasgow. So we're going to get some background and statistics, and then I'm going to follow on with a little explanation as to how the Mitchell Library works, because if you haven't visited, or even if you have, sometimes the way we work can be a bit opaque because we're quite a large and old library. I'm then going to look at a little bit of previous research that's been done on the subject and discuss a bit of that. And then I'm going to follow that up with probably the biggest section, which is going to be looking at the results of the survey that I did with Mitchell Library staff in early 2022. I'll then finish off by looking at some of the things we've changed as a result. And then I'll look forward to some stuff that certainly I'd like to do in the future if we have the opportunity. So we'll start off with some statistics about homelessness in general and about Glasgow in particular. I think these facts are worth knowing. I think when they're laid out in black and white like this, they're pretty shocking. Most of these statistics are taken from the Scottish Government report on homelessness from September last year, so September 2022. The stats I used when I was preparing this research was the previous years because that hadn't come out yet. But if there's differences, I've noted them here. So there were in between 2021 and 22, there were 15,414 households assessed as homeless in that period. That was a 6% increase in the year before. So by households, what that means is it could be a single person, but it could also be a family, just a group of people living together that have been made homeless. Now, around 400 of those across Scotland are actively sleeping rough. So they're sleeping outside and they don't have a regular place to sleep. The rest have some sort of regular place to sleep. What that can be is kind of sofa surfing at a friend's house. It can also be some temporary accommodation provided by the council as well. In terms of demographics of that, 44% of them were single males, 20% were single females, and the rest were groups. And one thing that is worth noting is that the ratio of white Scottish people to Black and minority ethnic Scottish people is 84% white and 16% Black and minority ethnic, which, when you consider that Scotland's Black and minority ethnic population is only about 2.8%, they're pretty heavily overrepresented in that group. Now, you might hear from people or media that homeless people are potentially choosing to be in that situation. That's often a narrative that you hear. The stats don't bear that out. So as you can see by that second number, 15,155 people were assessed by the councils as being unintentionally homeless or non-intentionally homeless. That means that only about 1% in inverted commas choose to be, or less than 1%, I think it's about 0.7%. The most common reasons for people having to leave housing and ending up homeless are 38% of them are asked to leave their home in some way or another. Usually that's evictions, but it could be, for example, they live with family members that then have other family come to stay with them or have a child or stuff like that and no longer have the space. And about 13%, the next biggest section, is what's called non-violent relationship breakdown. So that is literally just divorces, breakups. They don't have a violent element, but do leave one person with nowhere to go. Of the 15,000 households, in that 15,414 households, there are 9,130 homeless children across Scotland. So the stereotype we imagine of homeless individuals is like kind of being this sort of male of a certain age, maybe with alcohol problems or something like that. It doesn't fully bear out because there are thousands and thousands of homeless children across Scotland. Of that 15,000, about 14,251 are in some sort of temporary accommodation provided by the council. These are usually in the form of kind of halfway houses or shelters which have multiple families staying in kind of a dormitory style room. So they're not ideal at all. This next slide shows what's going on in Glasgow specifically. So there's been a reasonable amount of fluctuation over the past 4 years, but you can see it has a pretty steady baseline of about 3,000 homeless individuals. These aren't households, these are individuals. So about 3,000 homeless individuals, with 2020 being the lowest, about 2,900, and then 2021 having that big jump to 3,700. The big jump between 2020 and 21 can be explained by, so the statistics are made between August and August. So those 2021 statistics were made between August 2020 and August 2021. And we all know what happened between August 2020 and August 2021. The pandemic was at kind of its height. And what happened then is a lot of shelters closed down, a lot of charities weren't able to support as many people. And also, I think quite importantly, people that were maybe relying on sofa surfing, staying with friends, could no longer rely on that because of social distancing measures. So this gives you a view of the scenario you're working with in Glasgow. This year, you've got 3,060 homeless individuals in the city, and a lot of them are based in the city centre naturally due to the locations of shelters, and if they're begging for money due to the kind of footfall. And for most of the day, they're outside in quite a cold country without access to anywhere to be out of the weather, or, and just as importantly, to have something to do, because what homeless people report is that more than anything else, being homeless is kind of boring. You're not allowed in a lot of places. You often can't find activities to do, except for, of course, the library. So we have some stats to work with, and now you can see what I was basing that research on when I conceived it. So what I'm going to do now is just walk you through a very short introduction to the Mitchell Library for those of you that are unfamiliar. So the Mitchell Library is Glasgow's central library. It opened in its current position in 1911, but it has been open in some form or other since the 1870s. It's been expanded twice since 1911. So it had a first extension that was completed in the 30s, and then a second one which took its was completed in the 50s, and then a second one that took its current form in the early 80s. So it's kind of made up of actually 3 separate buildings kind of squashed together. It has about, I think the number is about 3.6 million books at the moment inside it, but it's also got over 100 public computers. It's got access to ebooks, to e-audiobooks. It's got study spaces. It's got piano chorales. It's got group working areas. It's got a business intellectual property centre. It's a building with a lot going on inside it. It's also got a really diverse user group, kind of naturally because of that. So that includes students and researchers and academics because it's got such a huge collection, but then also the local community of Anderson, and then of course a lot of the homeless community of the city centre area. And I think the diversity of that user group can be one of the things that can lead to kind of tension. Right now it operates in 4 departments that you can see on the screen. Leisure and Lifestyle is our fiction department. That's in our ground floor. That operates as a local library for the Anderson area. So that does all the things you'd expect a local community library to do. It has PCs, it has a sort of Macmillan service, this is where all our book bugs and stuff like that take place. Our general services department is probably more what you would imagine from a big central library. So this is our non-fiction department. This is our kind of big floor to ceiling shelves. That's on level 4, but there are also PCs up there. We have a special collections, which has our family history centre, our Glasgow collection, and our most valuable books as well. And then we also have our business and intellectual property centre, where we help small businesses get started up in Glasgow. So the research I undertook to gauge the lay of the land in the Mitchell took the form of a questionnaire that was given out to staff. So we'll talk about that in its results later. And then a follow-up interview with 3 of the respondents of that questionnaire. Now, because the staff makeup is important to how this was done, I'm just going to give you a wee glance at how it stood at the time of early 2022. So it's changed now in several ways, but this is what the staffing looked like in January 2022. We had 33 Glasgow Life assistants, which are library assistants, our counter staff. So they're our front-facing staff, the kind of key component to the library. We had 9 members of management for those 33 staff. So that includes 3 information officers, so me and 2 others, 2 librarians working in our general services non-fiction department, 3 special collections librarians, and 1 business librarian. So there were 9 of those in total. And at the time of the research, there were also 2 principal librarians that were kind of running the whole thing. That's now down to 1, but there were 2 at the time. So my criteria for who I spoke to in the Mitchell, because it's central, has the offices for Glasgow libraries. So there are dozens and dozens of people working upstairs above our public floors. They're doing various things for the library, including admin tasks, reader development, that kind of thing. The criteria I used was I was looking for members of the public, members of staff who have regular enough contact with members of the Mitchell public. And that's what I came up with these three categories of people. So you have some background on the Mitchell Library, you have some background on homelessness in Glasgow. And what I'm going to be talking about now is some of the research that had already been done by other library researchers across the world, actually, but also across the UK. And all these things really inform my thinking as I was going forward. So the research I did with Mitchell Library staff, I think you'll agree once you see all this and my research, it slots in quite nicely with all the stuff I'm going to talk to you about. So you've seen so far that I like to divide things into sections. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to divide this section into 3 more sections. First, I'm going to take a look at how homeless users use libraries, and that's from the perspective of people working in libraries. So essentially from our perspectives, what do we think of them? Second, I'm going to look at a little bit of research that's been done and actually, going out and speaking to those users and finding out how do they want to use libraries and how do they perceive us. And third, I'm just going to very briefly talk about a particular piece of research that was the only other one I could find that had done a similar thing to me, that had interviewed library staff members in a public library to find out their perceptions of homelessness. And that was by a person called Giesler in America. It was called A Place to Call Home. We'll cover that in a wee minute. There's no point in beating about the bush here. As we start to look about how library professionals write about homeless users, it can be tricky, and those of us working in public libraries know quite well how difficult it can be to balance all the different roles that we have. The fact is that we are working with increasingly small budgets, potentially increasingly small staff numbers, and with very diverse communities with very diverse needs. And the amount of those needs that we are expected to hit, I don't know if you feel this way, but I certainly feel that every year the number of those needs that we are expected to help with gets larger and larger, and that's really difficult. And it's especially so when we're talking about meeting the needs of a group like homeless individuals who are potentially very vulnerable and also subject to a lot of discrimination from others, including the public, but also potentially including staff. So the literature on this subject recognises that. You can see here a quote from Anderson. He says that staff are often torn between multiple roles when serving homeless patrons, some of which are beyond the scope of their jobs and training. And those who have been in library roles for a long time and seen the kind of collapse of social security in our society, which has left us libraries and also some other organisations holding more and more of this social help, might feel this quite keenly. Another researcher called Wong said that he found that library workers do actually want to accommodate homeless users as much as possible, but they also feel that services for homeless users aren't part of their job. So they feel that the services that are needed should be provided, but they are not necessarily the people to provide them. And that's certainly something that came out in my research as well. What one researcher found, Kelleher, and I think this might resonate with you guys, is that most librarians in the situation of having to work with a lot of homeless individuals are sympathetic to the homeless individuals, but frustrated by low budgets, lack of support, and lack of training. And I think that would resonate with everyone here. So these are some of the more, you might say, reasonable or balanced opinions on homeless users using libraries. Not everyone is so reasonable and balanced. There are a lot of articles that come out over the years that are much more, will be kind and say much more blunt. So there are a couple of essays in particular which are on the screen there, which I want to draw attention to. I think they're both free to access, so I would actually have a look and see if you can read them, because they're interesting. I draw attention to these because they might be things that you have heard from colleagues or from the public, and I think it's important to kind of face up to the reality of what we might be hearing people say about other homeless users. And I think that it also may be thoughts that we have had, or versions of thoughts that we have had. I would expect that these two people have put it a lot more bluntly than you have even in your head, but they kind of encapsulate frustrations, but maybe take them too far. So Cronin's piece is really blunt. It says simply that a library is not a refuge for the homeless. And it says that we're getting to the point where a disruptive minority is effectively preventing the majority of bona fide library patrons from exercising their rights. So I think that last quote is something to look at. This is a distillation of what you tend to hear quite a lot from people in a sort of one-to-one basis. And I think the problem with it is that word bona fide. It's the assumption that there's like a right and a wrong way to use public libraries, and that often homeless users and other vulnerable users are not using them in the right way. But I think if we see public libraries as one of the last free public spaces where people can just kind of exist, and where coming there just to exist, just to be in a place where no one's going to ask you to spend money and no one's going to ask you to leave. And I think you can argue that that is a reasonable use of the space. And so I would reject the idea that people using the space in that way are not kind of bona fide library patrons that Cronin imagines, which is likely to be people kind of taking out books and researching, that kind of thing. Even more bluntly, Bullard, the second essay there, he says that today's libraries, I kind of love this quote, it's insane, but I love it. Today's libraries have become a haven for the homeless, the young, the substance abuser, the sexual deviant, the elderly, the criminal-minded, and the mentally disturbed, and he is not happy about it. So putting aside that he's equated the elderly and the young with sexual deviance and criminal-minded people, he's also equated homeless people with sexual deviance and criminal-minded people. So he has a very low opinion of users who aren't using the library in a very narrow range for a very narrow range of activities. And this is something that I think we may all have heard some version of from colleagues or from the public. I want to be clear that the idea that homeless users are a disruptive minority is something of a myth. I guarantee you that if you work in public libraries and I took you in with all your regular users in the library and said, point out to me the homeless users, I guarantee you would miss quite a few of them. A lot of homeless individuals, particularly homeless women, but also homeless men, put a great deal of effort into not, in inverted commas, appearing homeless. They try very hard to look as clean and as regular as possible. They do this because first of all, there's a lot of stigma and shame associated with being homeless, simple as that. But they also do it because they are then less likely to be asked to leave services that they kind of desperately need. So the average homeless person is not trying to cause trouble. In fact, they're trying to keep their head down as much as possible because they know that their rights to the library are very easily taken away compared to other people. What can sometimes happen is that there is a higher incidence of, say, alcoholism or drug abuse in homeless communities. I'm always sympathetic to that because I think if I was sleeping outside, I would probably drink a lot too. And the few individuals that are doing that are maybe taking up an inordinate amount of your time, but these are individuals, not a class of people. So I think it's really important to note that regardless of what your reasons for thinking it, if you're categorizing an entire class of people as problem patrons, this is just discrimination, and there's no other way to put that. You can't judge a whole group of people by some individuals that you're dealing with. You need to take each individual as an individual person. So the question which arises from a lot of that previous work that I've talked about is, how are homeless users using the library, and is it actually different from anyone else? And we can find that out simply by asking them. And the answer is that no, they're not really using it any differently than anyone else. What Wong found is, like other regular users, homeless persons have general and specific needs when they visit libraries. Some of their needs are information related, like some people's are, some of them are not, as other people's are. But when their informational needs are considered, they're usually found to be pretty much the same as anyone else. And research by province speaking to homeless people found that the two most commonly reported needs by all patrons, not just homeless people, but by all patrons, were employment and financial needs, closely followed by computer access. So these are the two things that people are needing the most. And that's not actually changing whether you speak to homeless people or house people. So their information needs are the same. So the idea that homeless users' needs are the same as other users is something worth remembering. So in the early 2000s, a researcher called Kelleher was looking at internet access when they were first introducing it in Boston in America. And he found that Internet access seems to be very important to homeless people, not entirely surprising, but he spoke to them and he found that they simply enjoy the ease of accessing information and entertainment online like anyone else. And this is 100% true. Homeless users, they shouldn't be judged just by the fact that they're homeless, of course. So they have diverse interests just like any other person, and that might be watching things online, it might be reading about certain subjects. Their informational wants and needs are pretty much the same as anyone else. So contrary to the beliefs of Cronin, who we just looked at, and others, homeless people tend to use public libraries basically the same as we all do. Having said that, you might then be sitting wondering, well, if that's the case, why are we even having this presentation? Why are we talking about homeless users separately at all if they're using public libraries in the same way as anyone else? I think there's a pretty good answer to that. I'll put it on your screen here. Wong says that homeless users should be seen as a special group in libraries, not because they're separate from others, but because their informational needs, although they are the same as others, are often underserved and their rights to access to libraries are often not clearly defined. So homeless users are more likely to be asked to leave libraries. That can be for smell, for example, or for drinking, or for things like that. Now, drinking, okay, we can let that go, but often people don't want to smell. To be clear, people don't want to smell bad. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks, I would like to smell bad. If someone is not able to get access to washing facilities, that is not their fault. And I know that can be tricky when you're dealing with public libraries and with other customers' complaints, but it's worth remembering that if someone's been asked to leave because they've not been able to wash, then they're essentially being asked to leave for something that's not really within their control. Additionally, when their rights to access to libraries are removed, homeless users are often at a disadvantage because we all know that public library complaint systems are pretty opaque, they're pretty difficult to deal with. And it's also worth noting that if two people come up with a complaint to you, one of them is in a neat three-piece suit and is washed and clean, and then the other guy is in a tracksuit and it's clearly not washed in a few weeks and maybe smells a drink, and they're both saying the same thing, I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, it's very likely that we would take the first complaint much more seriously than the second, even though they're both the same complaint. So when their access to libraries get removed, it can often be more difficult for them to get that access back. So this idea of how we are perceiving homeless people affecting their access to libraries is what Giesler found out when he was doing that research that I talked about, A Place to Call Home, where he spoke to library workers. So what he found is that the participants he spoke to, so these were all library assistants, they overwhelmingly spoke of the importance of treating all patrons, homeless or otherwise, alike, but also felt that doing this was really, really difficult with homeless patrons because of all the things that we've talked about. And what Giesler found is that all of the staff reported that they felt that homeless users were often receiving unequal treatment. And what he suggested is that when you're trying to treat everyone equally, you can end up ignoring specific needs and challenges that a group like homeless patrons might present. So we come to this idea of equality versus equity. We should be aiming to get everyone the same outcome in terms of their library use, not in treating everyone exactly the same. So we should be aiming for everyone to get the same thing, the same amount out of a library, but that may involve giving extra help to some people. And that's not just homeless people, okay? That can also be people with disabilities, for example. And we need to make accommodations to make sure that everyone can get as much out of our services as possible. So what all this boils down to is it's striking a balance between making what Neves here calls the destitute, which I don't like, but we'll call homeless, feel welcome, and the general library public and staff feel comfortable. That's a really tricky thing to do. And I think all of this research really was reflected in the survey I did with the Mitchell Library staff. So it's the moment you've been waiting for. In early 2022, I sent out a very detailed survey. So there is a link in the chat to the Google Drive for CILIPS, which has the survey I sent out in it. So you can open that up and have a look, because I'm going to refer to the questions a lot, and I'm not always going to tell you. I'll always tell you what the question is, but I might then jump about between them. So if you want to follow along in that, it's probably best to have that open. So I sent out a very detailed survey to staff, all the people on this list. The survey had 17 questions. The first three were what I would describe as kind of housekeeping questions about your job role, for example. So I'm not going to discuss those. Questions 4 to 13 took the form of what are called Likert scale, close-ended questions. This is just pointless jargon. All it means is they were rating statements between strongly agree to strongly disagree, and that all you could do was choose between those options, so they were kind of closed questions. And in question 14 to 17 were open-ended questions, so I'd ask the question and then just put a text box for people to express themselves in their own words. All of the questionnaires were anonymous, and the very last question on the list allowed people to put themselves forward for an interview, and I then interviewed 3 people that took part in the questionnaire. Obviously, the interviews were not anonymous to me, but in my research, I kept them anonymous. Now, when I first made this presentation, it was a bit different. It was longer than what I'm going to show you. I'd included data about the answers to every close-ended question, but I just couldn't find a way to get that and a useful discussion of them and time for questions in the time that we have here. And I'm already running a bit later than I thought. So I had to pick out some of the more interesting close-ended questions to discuss. Now, I know that seems like cherry picking, and the reason it seems like cherry picking is because it's cherry picking. But I'll put my contact details at the end of the presentation. And if you want to get in touch with me and see the full results, anonymous results, you can absolutely do that, and I'll send them to you. For this reason, and because I found it hard to be able to guarantee the anonymity of them for this, I'm also not going to talk too much about the interviews, because I just wasn't able to make sure they'd be anonymous, particularly if there are people from Glasgow libraries that were going to be in this chat, and I didn't think that was fair to do it. But again, I can send some select quotations from the interview to you if you would like. So we'll make a start. So we're starting with question 5. What I'd ask there is, which of the following best reflects your opinion of homeless individuals using the Mitchell Library? So you can see that 4% felt somewhat negative, 36% felt neutral, and then about 60% of staff felt either very positive or somewhat positive about homeless users making use of the library. This is gratifying, this is good, and it was reflected in the open-ended questions. So most of the answers suggested that while staff might be concerned about funding or about how they could best help the homeless users using the library, no one seemed unhappy to have them in there. Very few people seemed happy to have homeless users in there. They all agree that homeless users are legitimate users of the library. It was just whether they could serve their needs appropriately. Looking at question 6 here, it may seem kind of slightly contradictory. So I've said the question is, I think homeless users generally have a positive effect on other Mitchell Library users, and you can agree, disagree, or be neutral on that. So most people were neutral, and then equal amounts agreed and disagreed. So while most people in question 5 indicated that they didn't have a problem with homeless users using the Mitchell Library, in this question, equal numbers agree and disagree that homeless users, some don't have a positive effect on other users in the library. So 24% of people thought they potentially had a negative effect on other users. I've tried to think about how to explain this result in a couple of ways. First of all, I think it could reflect some ambiguity in what I meant by using the library in question 5. We've already talked about this idea of like bona fide users. So it could be that people were taking question 5 as should homeless users be allowed to use the library, and then thinking as long as they're using the library in a way that they think is appropriate. And then this question maybe reflects the fact that these people maybe don't think that homeless individuals are always using the library in an appropriate way. The second thing is that it could simply be my fault. The quite large amount of neither agreeing or disagree might suggest that this question wasn't clear enough. In fact, the second interviewee noted that they said that when I was answering it, it took me a bit of time to figure out what I thought it meant. So this question may be a bit skewed because I've maybe not phrased it the way I should have. Looking at question 9, which is, I think that Mitchell Library does enough to help homeless users make use of its services, running from disagree to agree. 72%. Most respondents, a supermajority really, thought that the Mitchell doesn't do enough to help homeless users make use of its services. Only 12% thought it did. This is interesting because, judging by the answers to the open-ended questions that we're going to come to, many respondents thought that the Mitchell had policies which it did not. And I'll explain what I mean by that. For example, some respondents seem to think that the library had policies against sleeping in the library. So one respondent said, we have some policies around sleeping which aren't helpful. Another said, I don't think people are allowed to sleep in the library. Actually, that's not true. I mean, in practice, often people that are sleeping are asked to wake up, but there is no written policy in Glasgow libraries that says that you cannot sleep in the library. These are local decisions that are made. As another example, several respondents to the open-ended question suggested that needing a home address is a barrier to accessing the library. So one said that we could refrain from asking for an address in order to gain library services. Another suggested that we could use some sort of standard address if people have no fixed abode. These are good, laudable concerns and suggestions, but it's worth noting that for the last few years, Glasgow Life has already had the policy that if you're of no fixed abode, then your address should be put as the library address. So it's good that people were thinking about that, and it reveals that unfair treatment for homeless people is on people's minds. But this isn't actually an issue in a way that these individuals thought that it might be. And what that reveals is that unfair treatment of homeless people could potentially result from ignorance as easily as from existing policies. So people could be being asked to leave for sleeping when that's not a rule. They could be being refused a library card potentially because they don't have an address. So that was something that was concerning to me reading this. Question 13 was, I think the Metro Library needs to do more in future to be welcoming to homeless users. So this is quite reflective of the previous question. 76% of people agree that we need to do more to be welcoming to homeless users. And about 20% of people were unsure, and then very few disagreed. So whether the unsure people were unsure about what the Metro should do, or whether they were unsure about what I meant by more, and one of the interviews suggested that it may be the latter, is unclear. But what is clear is that most people agreed that the Metro Library had to do more to be more welcoming to homeless users. Next, we're going to have a wee look at the open-ended question. So these naturally produced a wider range of responses because people can say whatever they like. The first three of those questions, so the ones I'm going to discuss in detail, you can see in the screen there. But if you have it open on your screen, have the questionnaire open on your screen, you can see the others. And I would, for this section, have it open because I'm just going to jump about and say question 14, question 15, question 16. So maybe worth remembering them. So 14 was, what changes in policy, if any, would you recommend to help homeless users better make use of the Metro? 15 was, what do you think Metro Library staff could do to make the venue a more welcoming place? And 16 was that kind of classic question, if you had a magic wand that could change one thing, what would it be? So what I'm going to do, how I'm going to discuss this is thematically rather than by question. So four ideas came up very often in the answers to these questions. Those were the ideas of equity of access, policy, Metro Library policies, outreach, and funding. So equity was a really frequent theme from the answers to the open-ended questions. So that featured in answers to 14, 16, and 17. That arose so often suggested the Metro Library staff have an awareness that homeless users may struggle to receive equal treatment of the library. So answers to question 14 included suggestions of ways in which the Metro Library could improve the library offer for homeless users, which included access to mental health support and other welfare services, as well as assistance with accessing library services. There were also suggestions of removing restrictions of time on public PCs. There were also multiple suggestions of the removal of fines for later damaged books and the waiving of fines. I'm pleased to say that unrelated to this research, but very gratifyingly, quite soon after this research was done, Glasgow Life got rid of the library fees, so that's very good. Answers to question 16 regarding equity included things such as that the Metro Library would change about the culture, including the staff perception of homeless users. So one respondent said they would like all, and not just most staff that's on your screen there, to treat homeless users as equals, and that they would like to see a change in the treatment and reactions that homeless users are giving from non-homeless people. Another said they would like to change the view that homeless users are a nuisance to be tolerated. And in fact, 6 out of the 10 equity-related responses to question 16 related to negative perceptions of homeless users from the staff and public. So this indicates an awareness that this is an issue in the Metro on the part of the staff, but also suggests that it might be a barrier that Metro Library management we need to overcome going forward. This was further suggested by later answers, such as to question 17, when respondent said, I feel that homeless users are treated as a nuisance and undesirable. And another said that we should try not to stigmatise homeless users. On the theme of policy, this was the second most frequent idea to arise from answers, particularly in question 14 and 15. So answers to 14 involving policy involve suggestions as to how policy changes could remove barriers to homeless users in the library. So one noted that the Mitchell can be an intimidating place for customers. We have a lot of rules which change depending on which area of the building you're in, and sometimes which staff member you're speaking to. And that the Mitchell can be an intimidating place for customers is definitely something we've been trying to work on. And this was echoed by the third interviewee, who said that in the Mitchell you walk into this big vast space and it's not really clear where you go and what you should do. So it seems that problem of clarity of rules and clarity of how you use the space could be an issue. Another respondent noted that policies themselves are maybe not the problem, but raising awareness of them might be. So we've seen in the earlier answers, that people thought there were policies that didn't exist, like sleeping, and didn't realize there were policies that did exist, like allowing homeless users to sign up for a library card without an address. So definitely raising awareness of policies is something that we had to look at. Answers to question 15 often suggested the possibility of further staff training. So one respondent said that further training in mental health awareness, poverty, wealth inequality, unconscious bias could be welcome. And another said that a workshop on homelessness would be helpful in raising the awarenesses of the issue for staff. Another respondent said that some staff, both library and venue, require diversity training, as there can be a perception that customers shouldn't be using the library or do not, if they do not behave in a way that they feel is appropriate. This is an opinion that was echoed a lot in the staff interviews. Outreach came up slightly less again. Answers to question 15 included ways that the Mitchell can make the library more welcoming to homeless users. So they suggested we could consult homeless users about library services, and the Mitchell staff could be more confident in proactively finding and offering information in relation to support services available to homeless users, and that's something we've done a lot about. The theme of outreach also arose in answers to question 17, with respondents saying that the Mitchell has to work in partnership with homeless users to bring about change, and that proactively reaching out to homeless users should be prioritised in the same way that we actively promote all our other services. So this should just be something that we add to our promotional services. Using outreach to include homeless users in the library services development was also suggested quite a lot. So one respondent suggested that we involve homeless users in the development of the library and that we should help them shape the service. Finally, funding. So of the four main themes, this came up the least, but I think it's worth noting because it will often seem to me to be a concern of staff. So when it's mentioned with some anxiety, and I think we all recognise that kind of anxiety around funding, particularly now. So funding was something staff were very conscious of when answering the questions. So answers included a suggestion in question 16 of longer opening hours to allow an alternative location for homeless users to use in evenings and weekends. Unfortunately, the council, as you may know, Glasgow Council over the past few weeks has gone the opposite direction of that, and we're actually going to have less opening hours, which isn't good. A respondent to question 14 suggested hiring dedicated staff who are aware of issues faced by homeless users, which was a big discussion with interviewee B. And some of the staff were also concerned that funding cuts could be a future issue, quite prophetically, as it turned out. So in answer to question 17, one respondent said it had to be acknowledged that we are limited in terms of resources and that this will become increasingly the case, and this certainly seems to have come true in the past few months. Overall, these answers show that staff are aware of the homeless community's needs, but they are also aware that there could be funding issues in meeting those needs. So we're almost done. We've had a look at what staff have said about homeless users of the library, and I want to show you some of the things we've put in place, either based on these results or just through a general desire to improve the service. I want to be clear here that I'm using the term we very deliberately. This isn't one of those horrible competency-based interviews where I'm going to pretend I did everything and everyone else just kind of marveled at my genius. The Mitchell has a great team of people, and we do work as a team and have worked as a team to achieve these changes. And as we've seen from the answers here in the previous section, the team of people working in the Mitchell are eager to provide as good a service as they possibly can. I mean, it really is a great team of people, and I want everyone to kind of bear that in mind. So I'm going to start by talking about the essentially free things that we've done in the past year. This is stuff that could be easily replicated in your own libraries, I think, for the most part. And then we did manage to get a little bit of funding, but not specifically for this, but it has been able to improve the experience of homeless people using the library, and I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the first three things I did was an update in library signage. So I added some new signs and posters, two in particular. The first, which you can see in your screen there, is a list of useful phone numbers, which would be particularly useful to someone that's struggling with issues like homelessness at the moment. It's not only aimed at homeless people, right? You can see that it's got, for example, Childline on it, the refugee support team, but it does have organisations like Shelter and the Marie Trust who can provide help for homeless individuals. I've displayed these posters really prominently, particularly the ground floor of the Metro, so they're not hidden away in some space. It doesn't make anyone feel like there's some sort of separate group in the library. It's just information available to everyone, so that no one feels they're separate from the library community, but they feel that the help is there. On a related note, we've also quite prominently displayed these so-called tough topics finding aids. Now, I simply stole this idea from a library that I saw online completely unscrupulously. So it's not specifically related to homelessness, but a lot of the issues on this list here are issues that affect homeless people more than other individuals. So abuse, addiction, alcohol, depression, drugs, eating disorders, sexual assault, and suicide are all things that affect homeless individuals more than the general population. And what these posters allow people to do is to find the books under the jury system without having to ask staff about these potentially upsetting or embarrassing topics that they may not want to discuss with anyone else. More than one member of staff in their responses said they wanted to have easier access to material that would help homeless people day to day. So in response to this, I've made a pretty detailed folder which lists all the organisations helping homeless people in Glasgow that I could find. So you can see here 2 examples on the page. Each page gives a wee bit of information about what the organisation is, its phone number, its address, who runs it, it then has a list of the services that it offers. So you can see, for example, Hunter Street Health Services offers a homelessness GP and a homelessness addiction team, and then it has a wee map which shows you where to access them. So I've got I think there's about 50 or 100 organisations in it. I keep it as a wee folder at our main desk, and that means that the staff can, if someone comes up needing help, as is often the case, the staff have something they can refer to point people in the right direction. And this has definitely been something that has been used across a couple of difficult situations over the past year. Another thing I've been making an effort to do, which was brought up by staff a lot, as you saw, is doing more outreach to organisations which help homeless people and to homeless people themselves. So first, this took the form of a kind of draft email that's sent to all of them, but that was followed up by visiting organisations, dropping off leaflets, or in the case of CILIP Community Scotland, I went and spoke to all of their staff members about what the library offers, and made sure that they were all comfortable with pointing people towards our offers. What I've always found is that they're always surprised at how much we offer and that they had no idea what we had on offer. I've also given tours for both staff and homeless clients of these organisations. I've given several of those, and I continue to do those through the year. That's probably the most regular thing I do. I find this always results in library sign-ups from homeless individuals, and then I regularly see attendees of them using the library later on, which is really gratifying. I think the Mitchell Library is quite an imposing building, an intimidating building. Staff noted that there. And I think that when the mystery is dispelled, when they've came in, they've had a look around, and also they know some friendly faces in there, I'm finding that people are being much more comfortable to come in and use it. The final free thing we've done is taking a look at training. So some of this has been quite straightforward in the form of reminding staff about the policies that we have, inclusive policies like signing up people without a home address, or not asking people to leave. But other training has been a bit more difficult to get, if I'm honest. I reached out to organisations like Shelter Scotland, for example, but I found that they, with the cuts that are going on right now, rarely had the capacity to get out to see us. Salvation came in the handsome gentleman you can see on your screen now. His name is Ryan Dowd, and he runs a homeless shelter in the US, and he also provides training for libraries through his homeless library program. So what I managed to do was arrange one free live and a few pre-recorded training sessions with his organisation that I screened for the staff. The sessions contain practical, no-nonsense advice for working with homeless people in a really humane and kind way, while also maintaining the order and the rules of the library. The staff feedback was really, really positive for this, and a lot of staff have told me that they've used the techniques that he's taught them going forward. I would really highly recommend his resources. Some of them are free. For example, he has a weekly newsletter, which is really interesting, and periodically he'll offer the the paid for resources for a free trial. So keep an eye out for it, and it's really worth signing up for. I think your staff will get a lot out of it. I know I did. Finally, help can come from some unexpected places. In this case, we got a little bit of money from the Warm Spaces Fund from the Scottish Government. So the Mitchell was designated a warm space towards the end of last year, and we got some money, and that money has been used for the benefit of the whole library community. But I think that a lot of the things we've done are going to particularly help homeless individuals. So this wasn't as a result of my research or anything like that, but it's been a really nice coincidence. One of the biggest and best effects of the money was the opportunity to purchase new furniture. We really pride ourselves in being a place where people can rest and relax without having a reason to be in the building, and the new furniture has made this possible. So you can see that we've improved the furniture in the main foyer, in our leisure and lifestyle not fiction section. Our landings now have sofas and group study areas, and we've made use of space which previously was empty, with couches and chairs to give people more places to sit. And this is especially valuable for homeless individuals who come across frightfully few places that are going to allow that. So that brings us to the end of the talk, allowing hopefully a tiny bit of time for questions. I've gone a bit over. Just before I go though, I want to list a few things that I would like to do more of in the library, because in no way is this work done. So I'd like more training for the staff. That's the big thing. I'm approaching other organisations, and I'm going to get some in. I think Simon Community Scotland, I'm really hoping they're going to do some for us. And I'm going to get some organisations in to talk to staff, because staff are always very happy with the training. They always find it really helpful. I want to invite more organisations in to see us. I want to do more of those sort of tours. I'd like to have funding for things like warm drinks in the winter. That would be really great to have. I'd also like to do more library events for adults. I think we're really good in public libraries at doing events for kids, but I find that we don't do enough events for adults that aren't kind of self-led. So we do things like book groups and stuff like that, but they tend to be self-led. So I'd like to arrange some events for adults. As part of the Warm Spaces Fund, we got board games, chess and stuff like that, and maybe I'm thinking of doing a kind of adults board game night and things like that, so that adults also have kind of fun things going on, or more fun things going on. And then once that's all done, I'd like to do a follow-up survey with the staff to see how they're feeling now. Some of this is really doable. Some of it's difficult, or funding-wise probably impossible. But I think it's important to have kind of aims as we're going forward. So that's a bibliography. If you want the slides, I'll send them out to you. And I think they're actually on the Google Drive, so if you want the slides, you can have those, and bibliographies on there. I'd like to thank everyone for coming along today, and I really hope you enjoyed the talk. Sorry, it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I'd love to hear any questions you might have. If you don't have any now, but you think of something later, my contact details are on the screen there. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Kavan. That was fantastic. It was, I mean, obviously, sort of quite shocking statistics if people aren't aware of them, but so brilliant to see how research and also actually consulting with staff can really help tackle what's perceived to be a challenging issue in a lot of public libraries. So really, for other issues, this is a great way to learn to see how research can be used, and some of that was fantastic. So thank you so much. We've got a few minutes just for questions. We had a question there perhaps was genuinely to the room, but Kavan, I'll put it to you as well. Just, do any libraries in Glasgow provide free toiletries or food? And if so, is there funding that you have for this, either locally or centrally?
I think Don Valence has answered that there. So we at the Metro, I should have really mentioned this. Through the Welcome Places, we partner with FareShare, and they give food to the libraries, but we also have free period products in all of our toilets as well. So that's what we have in terms of toiletries, and then food. The Welcome Places stuff, I think it comes on a Thursday morning. It goes very fast, but it seems to be really popular.
Thank you. And the question from myself: do you think there's more that we as a whole profession, not just CILIPS, but more generally, could be doing to make sure that councils understand the role of libraries within supporting homeless users, so that there is more, so it's not just trying to pick up the slack, so it's part of a wider infrastructure that can support people?
I think that's something worth pointing out to councils when it comes time and they're thinking of cuts because I think sometimes councils are thinking of cuts in terms of libraries being a kind of leisure activity, which they are also, But I think we should really emphasise that we're also performing a really, really important social role, and we're potentially performing a social role that is allowing the council to save money in other areas. So I think that's worth noting.
And your final, do you feel that consulting with staff and doing the survey helped, perhaps if there was any staff who were reluctant about these, to come on the journey a bit more by the fact that they'd been engaged with and asked these questions?
I think I definitely found that, particularly with the training from Ryan Dowd. So there were staff that I maybe knew from individual, just chatting with them through the years, that were maybe more doubtful, that they found that once they had the training, they were a lot more confident and maybe feeling a bit more empathetic. So I think that the training is kind of a key thing, because staff can often feel like they get landed with all this stuff, but they don't get any training to help them do it. You know, they get landed with all these new roles, and they don't necessarily get the training to help them do it.
Thank you. So there's just two final questions. I know we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll maybe ask both of them, and then if you can summarise. So first question from Nikki. In regards to the survey, after reflection, would there be any questions you would add or any changes you would make? And Kate has asked, do you think libraries can offer volunteering opportunities for homeless people in their way back to employment?
Kate's is a really cool question. Philadelphia did this. So they offered homeless people kind of minimum wage jobs, as they were having trouble with people taking drugs, selling drugs in their toilets in Philadelphia Central Library. And they offered homeless people the job of toilet attendants, which both cut down on that issue and then also gave homeless people a kind of way back into society potentially. So I think that is a cool thing that's worth considering. And then in terms of any questions I would add, I think there are questions I would make clearer, because I think that the amount of don't knows in some of the questions probably reflects that I didn't make the questions clear enough. And I think I would have liked to do more interviews, but even the 3 that I did, I had not anticipated how much time an interview would take in terms of transcription and stuff like that. But if I was to do it again, had like unlimited time, I would have liked to do more interviews and just kind of dig down into the issues with people a bit more deeply.
Thank you, and perfect timing. That's us just hitting 12, so we'll round up there. So can I just say thank you so much, Kavan. The level of detail in there, as well as the overview of the Mitchell was fantastic. Really appreciate you doing that, and I think it's so much to learn from, and I'm sure everyone else would agree with that hopefully as well. So thank you so much. Just to say to everyone, we will be sharing the slides have been shared in that Google Drive link, but when we do get it up on YouTube, we'll share that, and feel free if you do want to share this with colleagues as well. Thank you very much. If there's any final questions, just please do just email Kavan with the contact details, and I'm sure he'll be able to help you there as well. So thanks again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday and a good weekend.